Welcome to the Business Leadership Series, where we engage with leaders who are making an impact on their worlds and who want to share their knowledge and experience for your personal and professional growth. The following interview is designed to inspire you to become the best leader you can be. Your host, Derek Champagne, is the founder and CEO of The Artist Evolution, a full-service agency building successful brands, marketing tools, and campaigns, and also the author of the best-selling book, Don't Buy a Duck. And now, let's begin today's Leadership Series interview.
Welcome to the Business Leadership Series, where our goal is to inspire you to become the best leader that you can be. Our guest today, Cort Dial. He is the author of the Globe and Mail's 2016 #1 business book, Heretics to Heroes, a memoir on modern leadership. He's an author, speaker, performance coach. He's got an impressive resume, the president of Cort Dial Consulting, where he's successfully guided business coaches and executives from organizations such as Chevron, Intel, US Borax, Disney, and Apple, among others, to cultivate a new breed of leaders. Cort, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Derek.
I'm honored to have you. I've read the synopsis of your book. I'm really excited to read through it. And you've just got a really cool story. Take me back to some of your early years and kind of give us a kind of quick overview of how you got to where you are today.
I came out of college with an engineering degree and went to work for a large chemical company and had some experiences early on that really affected me in the way I looked at business and leadership. One of the experiences I write about in the book is where I made decisions and took some actions that led to a gentleman losing his life. And I actually was holding his hand, what was left of his hand, as he passed away. And this was at a very young age. And I started to really think about myself and the type of leader I wanted to be, and that had a big effect on me. And so I started leading different than everyone else for the most part. I started leading by inspiring people, taking great care of my people, communicating with my people, and doing a lot of things that I teach today. And I found it worked. And I started getting a lot of attention through that, and ultimately was made what they called at that time an internal coach in the company, and I started coaching other plant managers and executives, and ultimately went out on my own about 30 years ago, and have been doing what I do just about ever since.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's hard to talk about those things, and it was such a transformational point in your life. Do you remember what kind of leader, I know you were young, but do you remember what kind of leader you were before that incident? And that transformational shift that happened, is that still really clear to you of the change that happened with you?
Yeah, I guess I would describe myself as unintentional. I was basically being whoever everyone else was being, behaving the way, just trying to fit in. And which is very important to human beings for us to fit in. And if we don't realize that and have the ability to resist that, it's amazing who we can become and what we do. And I essentially made decisions based on this gentleman because he was a contractor, not because I was concerned about his safety and welfare. So we treated him like second-class citizens and put him in a position we would have never put our own people. I certainly wouldn't have ever put anybody I really cared about in. And as a result of that, the gentleman lost his life. And so fortunately, our plant manager called all of us together, and we spent almost 6 hours in a room. There were actually fist fights in the rooms. There were all kinds of, it's amazing what happens when you have a lot of pride about the work you do and the safety of the work you do, and then you kill someone. It's amazing all the finger pointing that goes on. But the plant manager wrote on the chalkboard, "How did we kill this man?" And he said, "We're not leaving this room till I get a satisfactory answer." And the answer I ultimately gave him through a lot of tears, I was actually sobbing at the time, was, "Hey, we killed him because he's a contractor. I can't believe that's who I am, and I'm ashamed of what I've done, but that's why this man died." And he gave me 2 days off and then met with me in his office and had a long talk with me about how am I going to allow this event to affect me the rest of my life. And thank God he was there.
Wow, that's a powerful story. Again, I know you've shared it many times now, but it's still very real for you, and like it was yesterday, I'm sure. And I hope that our listeners don't have to go through this kind of incident or tragedy before they make some decisions like the things that you're going to share with us today about being intentional and being significant and being a better leader that's about our team.
And that's the primary reason why, when I do share that story, that's why I share it.
Yeah.
Is because I don't want someone to have to die for someone to learn the lessons or even get hurt to learn the lessons I learned about how do you really create performance. And it isn't done through what I thought systems and programs and equipment, and it's really done through the leadership of human beings.
Man, I want to talk more about that. How do you, before we go there though, how do you get through? Aaron Walker's a friend of our show, and he talks about he ran over a pedestrian and it changed his life, and it took him several years. How do you get through something like that, come out of the other side of it? For those of our listeners who might be going through something tragic in their own life right now, what are some small things you do or some steps that you took that you said, I'm going to make this a positive thing and help others and not let it consume or eat me alive?
The first thing was when I sat down with the plant manager early in the morning in his office. We spent a couple hours together and said, what commitment are we going to make as a result of what we allowed to occur here? And out of that conversation, and it's been my commitment ever since, what I call a stand. And it's that I stand for the health, safety, and well-being of the men and women who design, build, operate, and maintain the world. The men and women who get it done every day. Can be an engineer, could be a waiter, could be whoever. I stand for their safety and health and well-being. And that sort of guided me through the rest of my career. And it really made it very easy for me at any time to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do that. No, I'm not going to allow that. No, we're going to take the time. No, we're not going to put them there. And then the other thing that happened, which as I go through the book, I talk about other things that happened to me where I felt like I was given an opportunity to pay penance for what I'd done. And one of those came when that same plant manager called me a few years later and said, guess who's been put in charge of revamping our entire program for the way we use and interact and treat contractors. And I ended up being on his project team for that. And our basic principle was the only difference between a contractor and one of us is their paycheck has a different company name on it.
That's powerful. You've been all over the world. You've built corporate skyscrapers to South African jungles. Tell me about, you've got some other things you talk about, like your experience in Bahrain. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, that was another opportunity I thought was put in front of me. I was in a meeting of a large capital project with a large petrochemical company, building a big refinery in Saudi Arabia. And at the very beginning of these projects, all the investors get around a big, huge table. There's probably 40 people around this table. And they finally got to the point where they were talking about the safety performance of this project. And I was amazed to see that the company safety folks got up and said, we're not going to be able to have this type of safety performance we normally have in other countries. We're going to be using unskilled workers, so we have to expect we're going to have some fatalities. And they estimated 2 fatalities and about 100 serious injuries. And the process they used in agreeing and moving on to making different decisions in the meeting is they would go around the room and say, can you accept this? And it sort of reminded me of the same meeting the plant manager had with us when he was going around the room counterclockwise saying, how did we kill this man? And I was sort of brought back to that moment. And I think, my God, I'm in the same meeting. But this time, hundreds of men's lives are at stake, well-being's at stake. So when it got to me, the gentleman, everyone was saying yes, very nonchalantly. They could have been approving a budget. And it got to me and I said no. And the guy moved on to the next guy and then realized I'd said no. And he said, do I understand you said no? I said, absolutely. I said no. Can you help me understand why? Yes, I don't want to participate in any endeavor that's going to kill or hurt someone, let alone kill someone.
Right.
No, we can't accept that. And the safety folks got up and argued with me and said I had to be reasonable and accept facts. I said, then I'm unreasonable. I'm going to ignore the facts. And that ended up causing about a 3-hour conversation where the project manager ultimately stood up and said, if we can't commit to building this thing without hurting anyone, I'm quitting this project. He said, I've never seen it this way before, but it's not worth the end of even the tip of an Indian. And he said Indian because most of the workers were going to be Indian in Pakistan.
Right.
It's not even worth the tip of Indian finger to have this plant. The world doesn't need another refinery that bad. And I've never seen it that way, but I do now. And that project ended up working over 8 million man hours, and not a single person left the project for medical attention.
Wow, that's incredible. I know you achieved incredible performance there, but how much money and time did you end up saving on that project too?
Well, when you perform that way in safety, you end up completing the project ahead of schedule, under budget. You get all kinds of bonuses for that. Right. So it's hundreds of millions of dollars at time. The most recent engagement I had, it was about $500 million that they ultimately allowed me to put in the book. The manager there said I could put in the book. Wow. That my coaching had influenced.
That's incredible. Incredible.
And what was amazing about that project, the project manager allowed me to walk the project the last day and just say goodbye to a lot of the workers. And it was so heart-wrenching because some of them were so grateful for what had happened. They'd never been treated that way. And they had a nickname from the plant manager. It was Beloved Father, I found out. The interpreter told me that. But it was so sad because they just gave me addresses and phone numbers of, please go help my uncle. He's on a project in Kuwait and they're treated horribly, and just tore your heart out.
Wow. Tell me about the heretic. Why do you consider yourself first to be a heretic?
Well, as I talked about with you that I became an internal coach in the company, I was asked by a gentleman who was bringing together all the senior managers in the company, plant manager and above, about 600. At that time, the company had about 80,000 people in it. Wow. This huge event. And he asked me to come in and sort of stir up the pot. I was known as being sort of a little out there and had some different ideas. And he said, you're going to have 30 minutes. I want you to spend 20 of it stirring us up, and then we'll see what questions they have. And that's all I want you to do. So I got up and made 3 assertions. And the first one was, it was unacceptable to produce business results at the expense of people. That just was not going to be tolerated. And this is in the late 80s that I did this. So that was not going to be tolerated anymore. Society is going to expect us to produce the same results we do today and not harm anyone and not do any harm to the planet.
Right. Wow.
And I had a couple other assertions. And when I got all done, and I said that I'd be happy to, field any questions, the room was totally silent. And then after a few moments, seemed forever to me, but after a few moments, this man way in the back stood up and yelled out, "He's a witch, burn him." And the whole room burst into laughter, and we're applauding. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is really an interesting development. I really had no idea how to respond, but the gentleman who invited me shows up on stage with me, and he's got a mic, and he walks up to me and says, Cort, I have to say I don't agree with a single thing you've said here. And I started to think, you son of a gun, you invited me here.
Right.
But before I could really think much, he said, would you like to join my group? And I was shocked, and he said, I'm dead serious. We need people like you who can bring us new ideas, who can think different, challenge the way we think.
Wow.
And ultimately, he became my mentor. And got me into all kinds of situations, and he's the gentleman who actually helped me see that it was time for me to leave and go out on my own.
Wow, that's incredible. What an incredible story. A testament to that individual as well for bringing someone on his team that wasn't just a yes man.
Yeah, my job was essentially for about almost 2 years to go out and explore the latest, greatest thinking in the world and bring it back to them and write papers and tell them about it. And then I was sent out on different assignments to go look at things and explore different things going on in the company.
Wow.
But it was an amazing job.
Tell me about the All-In Leader. What is that?
Well, by All-In Leader, essentially, I have found that leaders, the most effective leaders, all share common realizations, common faculties and skills. And I basically say if you possess all of these, you're what I call an all-in leader. An all-in leader is someone who's in it for the big game, in it for good, no turning back. That, you've run into these individuals from time to time. There's no one going to stop them. There's no one going to get in their way. They're all in. And that's one of the first conversations I have with a client who invites me to coach them. I help them understand I only coach people that are all in. So let's talk about that. I don't want ever to have you, turn your back on me or back out of this. Before we sign on the paper, we're both all in for this. And that's one reason my engagements typically end up to be fairly long engagements. The other thing an all-in leader does is he plays a big game. She plays a big game. So an all-in leader doesn't look for incremental improvement. She looks to change an industry. She looks to change an entire paradigm. So that type of work takes longer. And as I said, I just ended an engagement with a petrochemical company, and it lasted almost 6 years with that gentleman.
Wow. It's incredible. So tell me, the only leader who needs to change is you. That's what you've said. What does that mean?
Well, I found that many people that I go in and invite me in to help them, they always want me to go work on their people. I need you to go work on my people in some sense. They don't overtly say that, but that's really where they're coming from. I need a new system. I need a new program. And in reality, I like to tell them, you're the big wheel. And the big wheel, when the big wheel spins at the top, the little wheels down at the bottom through that whole chain of wheels, they spin a lot. And most leaders don't recognize the effect they have on the organization. It's amazing. And a story I often tell to someone I'm new with, once when I was in this chemical company, I went to the credit union with my boss and his boss, and the CEO was there. And at that time in the company, you could only wear a brown, dark brown, a navy or black suit, and a white button-down tie. This is a very traditional company. Wow. And this CEO was in the most beautiful tan suit. I mean, he looked like $1 million. So he said hello to us, walked out. Guess who was wearing their tan suits the next day? My boss and his boss. And that started getting me thinking about, wow, he just totally blew away this policy that we had all thought was like written in stone, through one observation, as gentlemen. And so what I try to help leaders understand is if you change the organizational change, they're looking to you to give them a picture of the future in which to lead from. They're looking at you to give them missions that call the best from them. If you do your job as a leader, it's phenomenal what people can do. And so if you give them a big game, so an example, the engagement I just recently ended, that leader decided to put in front of his folks the mission that we're going to deliver every well on budget, on time, the first time. They drilled oil wells in the deepwater oil wells out in the Gulf of Mexico. Phenomenally complicated, difficult work, dangerous work. And that was impossible. You can't deliver every well on budget, on time at the first attempt. It just doesn't happen. And I told the gentleman, well, it's never going to happen with a leader like you. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, you're the only leader I've ever been around who puts out a congratulatory email to a team that gets it right the third time. That you're basically setting a standard. So I had a conversation with him. Are you telling me your people can't do this? And ultimately he said, absolutely, they can do it. Then what's missing? What's missing is leadership. They went over 18 months delivering every well on budget, on time, the first time. And that's where that $500 million comes from, that figure I gave you. When you get into that type of an organization, they spend billions of dollars like others spend millions of dollars.
Right. Wow, that's great. It's a great story. Talk to me about leaders leading people, systems controlling them.
I'll tell you another story that got me thinking about this. I was in Old Navy with my son. He was about 7 years old, and we were checking out, and he noticed all the security equipment that they took were taking off his clothes. So I, being a good dad, explained the entire security system to him, the towers out front and the hidden cameras and the security people and all that. And when I got all done, he looked up at me and said, "Why don't they all just not steal?" And I started thinking, you're right, Charlie. If everyone would agree not to steal, we wouldn't have to invest all this time and money in this system. We just wouldn't steal. And so I started exploring the social impact on performance, and I've developed this model called the 4 fields of performance. And most managers, most leaders, most supervisors try to harvest performance from what I call the systems field. That's where you have procedures and programs. Nothing wrong with those. Necessary, absolutely necessary. Or the behavior field. And they write most of their systems or procedures to try to control people, direct their behavior. But they're either oblivious to or they don't really see value in the other 2 fields because they come across as sort of touchy-feely. If you don't really get your feet in there and hands dirty in them, they just seem like this fluffy stuff. Right. But it's what I call the self field. So for an example of something that occurs in an individual self that affects performance is, if you're asking people to work and not get hurt, not have incidents or injuries, does that person actually believe that's doable? Most will tell you it's not doable. So if you don't do that work in the self field and have them to start hold that outcome, that result as doable and within their control, and if they don't have confidence in doing it, those three things make up what psychologists call confidence and victory and things like that. If they don't hold that, they're never going to produce that result. We can never outperform what we believe is possible, and we can never outperform our self-image. And those are 2 critical things in the self field that most leaders don't work on. They don't take advantage of. Doesn't cost you a cent when you're interacting with your people, or when you have your manager or supervisor interacting with people. They can work on people's self. Right. On their self-esteem. It doesn't cost you a penny. It's very easy to do. But, we don't talk that way to each other at work. We don't get really personal at work. We give people orders and directions, tell them how to do it, and come around and check up on them, And then the social field is all the things that a group hold together. And one of the most critical things is the social field is this desire to fit in, to belong. And I learned this lesson the hard way. I was supervising a chemical unit, and I had a new operator joining our unit. His name was Anthony. And he'd just gone through 3 months of intense training on all the systems and programs, how he's expected to behave during normal times, during emergencies. I mean, we trained our people well before we ever put them in a unit. So the day I'm introducing him, the moment I'm introducing him to his new chief operator and his fellow operators in the control room, the hazardous vapor alarm goes off, which means there's some bad stuff out there that can kill you. So this young man, he runs over to the safety board and starts putting on all the breathing equipment and everything that he was trained to don before he attempts to go outside and address a leak like that. But as he's doing that, the operators are running past him, running out the door, out to the unit, not wearing anything. And the chief runs by him, and the chief stops and looks at him, and he says, "Kid, are you coming with us, or are you going scuba diving?" What do you think the kid did? 19 years old. What do you think he did?
Coming with them, right?
He threw that equipment on the ground, ran out there. He knew I was standing there. I'm his boss. He knew I was there. He knew it was wrong. He went. Right. They came back in about 3 seconds. That door flew open, and they were like rats trying to get away from a fire. And they were throwing up. And it's amazing what happens to the human body when you get exposed to some of these chemicals. They barely made it back alive. This young man's throwing up in a trash can, and the chief comes over and pats him on the back and says, "Well done, kid." And that kid looked up, and with his sleeve, he wiped the vomit off his mouth, and he smiled at the guy. And I got that young man. I met him in the break room. I didn't want to have him feel like he was going to be disciplined or punished. I wanted him to tell me what he really felt. And I asked him, help me understand how you could make that decision and choice. And he said, Mr. Dial, I don't know. I wanted to do it the safe way. I knew how to do it the safe way. I knew I was putting my life at risk, my wife, my kids at risk. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered to me was fitting in with those guys. And it dawned on me that there's a social component that affects our performance here.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And that's just one part of the social component. The social field will actually trump the other three in virtually every circumstance, with one exception. And that's when an individual has a very strong sense of self. They're very clear on who I am, what I stand for, what I will and will not do. They can resist the social field. But other than that, it will always trump the other three.
So as a leader, how do you guide that person that's making a decision like that? What do you do as a leader to stay ahead of that or to prepare your team?
Well, if you're going to work in the social field, you have to get people together. The social field is a group phenomenon. And most leaders that I work with, when I say we're going to get people together after these first couple months of work, we're going to get everybody together. We're going to have a serious conversation about how we operate here. And we're going to create some what I call covenants. We're going to determine what our legends are, our myths. And we're going to address all those. And we're going to get real clear on who we are and how we do business here. And that is difficult work to do, but it can be done. We don't have enough time on the phone here to discuss it. But in my book, I describe over and over those type of conversations and what they look and sound like. My book, I wrote it to try to put people in the room when great leadership and great coaching were occurring and see what it looks and feels like.
And I love the approach that you took here with your book. I mean, you do tell some personal stories like you talked about already with your early years and the tragedy that happened. But you also have introduced us to Michael, to an executive who's brilliant, but he's rough around the edges at a top energy corporation. And you grant access to different high levels of coaching and as Michael does, this step-by-step adoption of all-in leadership. That's a great, I love the read. It's really cool. And tell me, what do you hope that readers' primary takeaways are going to be from the book and then from Michael's story that you weave in this book?
Well, I was basically writing and speaking to leaders. I hope what they realize is that I would benefit from great coaching. The CEO, I can't remember the gentleman's name, I apologize, but he's the CEO of Home Depot. And he says that no one's going to reach their full potential without a coach. And that's true. My son's a professional golfer. He's got coaches, a long list of coaches supporting him. And anyone who excels at any endeavor almost always has a coach. So I want them to recognize, because most of them here coaching, they think consulting, someone's going to come in and tell me how to do my job and work, which there's nothing wrong with that if you want a consultant.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with those. Coaching isn't that. Coaching is having you realize your full potential as a human being first, as be the fullest self of yourself you can be. And it's a very intimate. If you've read the chapters about Michael, you read about some very intimate conversations I have with him. And one of those that applies to the self field was he related to himself as a driller, not as an oil company executive. And I knew when I saw him speak and introduce himself that was totally insufficient to lead the organization to where he needed to lead them. He needed to accept and embrace being an oil company executive. That was part of the growth and development he went through.
You do a lot of your teaching through storytelling, dramatic dialogue. What do you like about this approach?
Well, when I work with coaches, that's the other audience for the book. I want them to see, I hope they up their bar. And one of the skill sets that's critical to be a coach is storytelling. Not making up stories, but telling stories and helping people emotionally, not just logically, get what you're talking about. Leaders are extremely emotionally driven. their emotional intelligence is extremely high. So storytelling is a way to affect people's emotions, a way to get people engaged. And it helps them realize the stories I tell that they're not unique. I've had so many leaders tell me, you're the first person I've told you, I really don't know what the heck I'm doing. You know, I got here because I could do this other job and do these things. But when I reach this point, I really don't know what I'm doing, you know, especially when it comes to safety of all things. The only times I've seen a leader break down and cry was when someone died or was killed. But the other times are when they were so frustrated by safety performance. And I just don't know how to do this. How do I get people to willingly do their job and not get hurt? Well, you better learn how to work in the self and social fields if you want to do that.
That's powerful. Hey, we've got just another minute here, and I want to be able to plug your book too. But, you know, Heretics to Heroes, tell me again why it's important, why heretics are needed, and what is the value? Give us a pitch for that.
Well, if you look through history, the greatest leaders have all begun as heretics, whether it's Galileo or King or Jobs. That's where they always begin. I encourage leaders to look for those heretics in their organizations. They'll be at the edges. They won't be typically respected. They'll be oddballs. I was one of them. But those are the people who are bringing you your future. I like to say heretics are time travelers. They go to the future. They visit, spend some time. They can come back and tell us about it if we'll listen to them.
Wow. That's an interesting perspective. I really like that. Any final words you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would just encourage you. I made a landing page for this interview. It's cortdial.com/business leadership series. And if they want to learn anything about me, what I do, or there's some free download on a white paper I've written there. I encourage them to go to that page.
And where can we find your book?
Amazon.com. It's available as an audiobook. I hired a great actor, Michael Bauer, out of New York to do the audiobook. He just did a great job of bringing it alive. And I really strongly recommend the audiobook. It's great. It's available in virtually every version.
Cort Dial, thank you so much for being our guest. You've got an impressive resume. You've got an amazing story. This book, Heretics to Heroes, a memoir of modern leadership. Go on Amazon and look for that book. And then cortdial.com, that's CORTDIAL.com/business leadership series to find show notes and white paper that you can get available. Thank you for doing that for our listeners. Man, Cort, thanks so much again for being our guest, and I look forward to continuing to follow the things you're doing. You're doing some amazing work, and I think it's so important what you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Derek.
You take care. We'll talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Business Leadership Series, where we engage with leaders who are making an impact on their worlds and who want to share their knowledge and experience for your personal and professional growth. This interview was designed to inspire you to become the best leader you can be.